August is here, and that means that the weather and the election cycle are heating up. The best way to beat the heat and stay up to date on the latest news from the US election to international breaking headlines is to become a DSR member and gain access to additional content across our network, in addition to other exclusive benefits. Use code BEATTHEHEAT to get 50% off of your membership and sign up today at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's Beat the Heat at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Now please enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. According to new reports, Republicans are bolting as fast as they can away from Donald Trump's racist comments attacking Kamala Harris's blackness. These reports paint a picture of a party that is suddenly in something of a panic about Trump's chances in November. This comes as Trump is positively raging about another piece of bad news for him. U.S. officials managed to negotiate a prisoner swap that freed Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich from Russian captivity. We've clearly entered a new phase in this race where Trump is suddenly in real danger. But why now? What exactly changed? We're happy to be chatting about this with Stuart Stevens, a senior advisor at the Lincoln Project and an operative with extensive experience in Republican politics who has forcefully renounced his former party. Great to have you on, Stuart.
Greg, thanks for asking me, man. I'm a huge fan, first-time caller.
All right. I wish we had call-ins, but maybe we can figure that out. Okay, Stuart, to catch people up, earlier this week at the National Association of Black Journalists, Trump questioned whether Kamala Harris previously self-identified as a black person, claiming she had described herself only as Indian American and treating her current identification as black as basically a hoax or a scam. Before we get into the politics of this, you said on Twitter that, quote, the Republican nominee is running the most openly racist campaign since George Wallace, and that every Republican who remains silent and goes along with it is condoning racism. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I think actually I'd ask permission to revise and extend my remarks and say that it's actually worse than George Wallace. Because I don't think that Wallace ever went to this strange racial purity argument that Trump is making. You know, this sort of does feel like birtherism, but it's much worse. I mean, birtherism was based upon a constitutional fact that if you were not born in the United States, you couldn't be president. Okay. Somebody proved that by showing a birth certificate. Stupid. It's racist. It's ugly, but at least it's grounded in some fact. What he's going after Kamala Harris for is really 1930s Germany Nuremberg laws style racial purity. Can she establish her racial identity through her parents? This is extraordinary stuff, and it is what Viktor Orban does. You know, he has given speeches about purity of blood, quote unquote. And I helped elect a lot of these people, Greg. I think if they're silent on it, they own it.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the purity of blood argument because Trump has repeatedly said that migrants poison the blood of the country. He's stuck by that. It is the most explicit declaration of great replacement theory that I think we've heard from pretty much any Republican. I'm not aware of anything quite that explicit. Are you?
No. It's amazing. And that the party has normalized this. I'm beyond having my heart broken, but I just never would have imagined it. Call me naive, but I never would have.
Okay, so speaking of Republicans, Politico's Playbook reported that virtually every Republican they spoke to about this episode was, quote-unquote, distraught about what this does for Trump's chances and also for Republicans down the ballot. Numerous Republicans ran away from this, including, of all people, Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville. Politico says GOP confidence in Trump is now slipping. One Republican strategist, Chuck Coughlin, don't know if you know him, says Republicans are desperately grasping around for an attack on Harris. They appear to be panicking. Now, Trump has dabbled in open racism before, but I think here the difference, in addition to what you said, was the kind of optics of it, sneering at the black journalist questioning him, plus this deep contempt for Kamala Harris's identity that builds sympathy for her at exactly the moment Trump is trying to smear her negatively. And crucially, it's all on a short video clip that can go all over TikTok and to everybody's phone. Is that why this in particular has Republicans so worried?
Well, before he died, Lee Atwater gave a sort of infamous or famous interview that's really worth digging up on the internet and reading, where he discussed the history of the Southern strategy to get longtime Southern Democrats to convert to the Republican Party, and playing the ways in which playing the race card have evolved. And in that interview, he says, it used to be you could just use the N word. Now you can't. Now we talk. Then you talked about busing, and then you talked about welfare. I think what is so shocking about this is the stripping off of any veneer of what it is about. He is literally talking about racial purity. He went before a group of black journalists and challenged someone for not being black enough. I mean, if we were sitting around Saturday Night Live and we proposed that as a sketch, I don't know if we're going too far. And when you see it, like you say, just the sheer ugliness of it is, look, I think it's 100% true statement. And there's not a board in America that would approve the hiring of Donald Trump to any position in any company of any size. And there's not a board in America that wouldn't dismiss him if he'd said these things. So we're supposed to elect this guy president? Look, but, everybody knew who Donald Trump was. This is why I don't really have a lot of sympathy for Republicans who say, well, after January 6th, I'd had enough. I guess in life you have to meet people where they are. But it was clear this guy was a racist. It was clear this guy was an incredible sexist. It's clear this guy hated women when he ran in 2016. So I have basically forced myself to confront that Trump didn't change the party, he revealed it. Because I just don't know any other intellectually honest way to look at it. People don't change from deeply held beliefs in a few years unless there's some great intervening piece of data. I don't believe in UFOs. If one lands while we're talking, let's talk about it. It'll change my opinion.
Let me ask you, Stuart, on that score, why is it that you recognize this now? I mean, this has been very evident for a long time that Republicans play this kind of racist political game. I mean, it's been something we've seen from Willie Horton. We saw with Ronald Reagan announcing his campaign in the place where the civil rights workers were killed, or at least launching it there.
Well, brother, I think it's a 100% fair question. And it's really asking that question is what led me to write that book, It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. And my opening line, more or less, in that book is blame me. I don't think there's any ability to be honest about it if you were involved in the process like I was. There's a whole trove of books that people write about Washington and politics, like if only they had listened to me. Well, I couldn't write that book. They did listen to me. mean, I helped elect more of these than anybody. I can only tell you how we saw it, I think. There's a group of us who worked for Bush, me, Nicole Wallace, Matthew Dowd, Mark McKinnon, the sadly departed Michael Gerson, who wrote for the speechwriter, later went on to write, Be Your Colleague. And we used to literally sit in the same room in the Bush campaign. And I think it's fair to say that we were very aware of this ugly dark side, but we thought it was the recessive gene and that we were the dominant gene. And that if only for reasons of political practicality, the party would become more like the direction we wanted it to move in. So Ken Mehlman goes in front of the NAACP in 2005, Ken Mehlman, chairman of the party at the time, and apologizes for the Southern strategy. Does that matter? Well, I think it does. I think that's the first step to realizing you have a problem.
Let me ask you though, Stuart, what I think some people would say to all this, right? And
Yep.
We're getting off topic, but what the hell? Let's just do it. Well, I think some defenders of a certain type of right-wing populism would say, I think Ross Douthat has argued something like this, is that whatever you think of Trump's racism, he actually did exploit genuine failings on the part of the Republican Party that aren't necessarily to do with its racism, right? The kind of supply side orthodoxy, the years or decades of kowtowing to the Republican donor class, that kind of thing. I mean, that in this theory, I don't really buy this theory, but it's an argument. In this theory, what happened was that Republican voters were made to be more vulnerable to this kind of racial demagoguery by policy failures on economics on the part of the Republican Party. What's your read on that? Do you accept that?
I don't buy that at all. If you go back and read, it's fascinating. Go back and read the coverage of David Duke when he ran for governor and Senate in Louisiana. The same argument was made there. Really, it's because, you got to understand here in Louisiana, we had the oil crash, petrochemical crash, and that's really what this is about. I don't think it's about economic anxiety at all. Trump's best group is those who made $100,000 or more a year. I think that is completely disingenuous.
Well, what about, okay, fair. What about the failures in Iraq, Afghanistan, the globe,
I think there are deep policy failures inside the Republican Party. Ultimately, the failure to appeal to more non-white voters is a policy failure, isn't it? I mean, there's a marketplace of political ideas. If you came up with ideas that would appeal to them, they were free to vote for you. They would. But we never did that. We never did the work that was necessary to be able to demonstrate in good faith, in a convincing way, to these voters that their best interests would be served by voting for Republicans. And, there was this embarrassing period in like the early 90s,
okay,
Greg, where the Republican Party decided that the problem with not getting enough black votes was we just didn't know how to talk to black people. So there was like this little frenzy of hiring black consultants to come down and talk to try to teach predominantly white campaigns and candidates how to talk to black people. And they would say things like, well, you need to talk about meaningful jobs, not just good jobs. And it's so hideously embarrassing to look back on. We'd all sort of nod and go out and do it. And of course, it made no difference. The problem wasn't that black people didn't understand what Republicans were saying. The problem was that they did, and they didn't like it.
Right. I guess here's the basic point I was trying to make and get you to respond to. On some level, one of the reasons Trump was able to take over the Republican Party was that the GOP was too beholden to its donor class, too pro-globalization, not concerned enough about the economic fortunes of working people, too besotted with adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's the argument. Is it
Yeah,
wrong?
I don't bet it. In the Romney campaign, we could see that there was a whole group of white voters who weren't interested in all what we were talking about. Taxes or international affairs or even, entrepreneurship. But if you were going to go out and do what Trump did and talk about racist stuff, Muslims, Mexicans are rapists, that would get their attention. And I would have bet if you did that. Now, I think people have a better sense of who Romney is. You know, if you went into Mitt Romney's office and suggested that, he'd throw you out. If I would have bet, though, that if you did that, what you would gain at the lower end, you would lose at the upper end of college-educated Republicans, which was happening up until the Comey letter in 2016. And I think it's a failure of the party. It's not about Trump. I think there's a lot of people out there, Republicans, that look at Trump and go, he's kind of a weird guy, I don't know. What's this porn star stuff? But hey, my governor's for him. I know my governor. He's a pretty good guy, or she's a pretty good person. I like her. Right. They know him better than I do, so it must be okay.
So, let's get back. Yeah, let's get back to Trump in the present. I'm sorry to have taken you on that detour. I'd love to talk about it for another hour, but I don't know if our listeners would put up with it if they haven't dropped off already. So Trump absolutely flipped out on Truth Social over the news of the prisoner swap for Evan Gershkovich. He demanded release of details about the deal, implying that it was a terrible one and that the U.S. had been played. Now, I want to remind everyone that Trump repeatedly declared that his friend Vladimir Putin would only release Gershkovich if Trump were elected president. So this is a major blow to Trump, and he doesn't even try to hide it, Stuart.
Yeah, I would say that Putin is a realist and is looking at this and realizing that Donald Trump is going to lose. And I think he's right. He is going to lose. I don't think we've ever talked enough about the fact that the Russians tried to elect Donald Trump. There's no question about that. No one argues about that or can argue credibly. They elected Trump. What did they get? Well, it turns out they got a lot. The group of the core of American politics that was the most anti-Soviet, anti-Russian, conservatives in the Republican Party became the core of the pro-Putin movement in American politics. That's extraordinary. That's the most successful covert operation in history by far. Must be. You got a country. You got a party. And it is that weird group of people that's like David Sachs and Musk that are all these, Putin-friendly guys. Trump is in this position. I've seen candidates like this before. He had convinced himself he was going to win, and now it's being taken back. And when that happens to candidates, even the best candidates, it's very destabilizing, and you have to reset. It's like, you think about it. It's like you think you're running. Somebody says, let's go out and run 10 miles. You run 10 miles. You go, well, actually, we're running 20 miles. That's a lot worse than if you started out to run 20 miles. And Trump is very emotionally ill-equipped to deal with this. I will predict that he's going to fire his campaign managers, Susie Wild and Chris Acevedo. J.D. Vance is a disaster. I think they had a bad convention.
Well, you brought up J.D. Vance, Stuart, so let's talk about his response to these events. He actually tried to argue that the prisoner swap happened because bad guys everywhere recognize that Trump is coming into office soon, so they're running scared. Vance said this is a testament to Trump's strength. I mean, talk about making lemonade out of lemons. This really shows they're trapped in this place where everything needs to be bent back to serve the cult leader's sense of himself, leading to really, truly incredible absurdities, no?
Yeah, I mean, what J.D. Vance is in the same position as Trump's doctor. He's the most healthy person ever to be president. If you read the Tim Alberta piece in The Atlantic, where he had Chris Acevedo and Susie Wiles predicting not just that Trump would win, but he'd win in a landslide, which I'd never seen anybody do this before in a campaign. I mean, the reason they're doing it is because this is how you advance in Trump world. So he has to say this. And what's happening to J.D. Vance is a microcosm of what happened to the Republican Party. You end up supporting a guy that tried to overthrow the government. You end up supporting a guy that has horrible things to say about women on tape. You end up supporting a guy who is a convicted felon. I mean, once you're in, you're in.
There is a real agenda around right-wing populism. There's immigration restrictionism, a few policies here and there that are supposed to actually boost working people's wages, trade, and a whole sort of suite of other things that are kind of designed to help around the margins. They don't really, I don't think they wouldn't do all that much for working people's wages, but they would do something, I think. But the point is, Vance kind of, is an adherent to that stuff and went down this path. And then he was a critic of Trump, right? A very vehement critic of Trump. But then he kind of saw that the only vehicle to getting anywhere with right-wing populism in the Republican Party, right, is Trump, because Trump kind of has this constituency captive, and you can kind of smuggle some stuff, past Trump, maybe if you're lucky, that actually helps working people. But as you say, the end result of this had to be apologizing for January 6th, apologizing for, just about everything Trump says and does. And there's not really any way, I think, to avoid becoming a total captive of Trumpism and Trump himself.
My take on J.D. Vance is, I think J.D. Vance is a very damaged, sad human being who will become whatever he feels in the moment is necessary for him to advance. So when he needed to seem like sort of a Northeastern liberal, when he was at Yale, this is what he aspired to be. This was seen as a success. He doesn't really come from poverty. He comes from sort of a failed suburban life. This is what he'll become. So he created this character called J.D. Vance and wrote a book about it. So then he falls in with Peter Thiel, who and becomes a Thiel disciple. Peter Thiel, international investment, heavy investments in China, gay, married to a man, doesn't believe in democracy, is very invested, literally and figuratively, in how to live forever. He's a nut. He's just a very wealthy nut. So then he becomes like a Thiel guy. And then he moves back. Somebody said, well, you move, McConnell comes and says, you could move back to Ohio. So he moves back to Ohio and gets elected to the Senate barely with Peter Thiel's money. So now he'll become a Trump guy. I think J.D. Vance would be up there with a hammer and sickle. He'd be a Trotskyite if it helped him. And he probably will end up being a Trotskyite before it's all over.
Vance also commented on Trump's attack on Harris's blackness. Vance said it was hysterical, meaning Trump
reaction.
Hysterical. But no, Vance, well, yeah, it's sort of a combination.
Oh, he thought it was funny. Yes, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, it's a little unclear, but what Vance did say clearly is that Trump was pointing out something real, the chameleon-like nature of Harris, that she's fake and a phony. So here you again see the MAGA worldview at work. They can't imagine that the middle of the electorate might view Harris's identity and her ascension as a positive thing, as proof of what America and American democracy can produce. The daughter of immigrants who had the opportunity to rise and worked hard to realize her potential. MAGA imagines voters will only see her as they do, see her rise as a race hustle or something like that, right? Race hustle. So you've worked in Republican politics a long time, and you've talked about how the GOP plays racial politics, and you've disavowed that. So let me ask you this. Is this, from Trump and Vance right now, is it a continuation of that ugly history, or does it have unique MAGA qualities, or is it kind of a combination of both?
No,
as someone who marinated in that world, what is it saying?
I think it's very much a continuation. And look, you talked about Reagan going to Neshoba County Fair. I'm a seventh generation Mississippian. I grew up going to the Neshoba County Fair. And for a long time, I defended him going to the Neshoba County Fair. Okay, Mississippi's a swing state. We forget Carter carried it. It was an important place to go. Everybody goes in the Shelby County Fair. And it was smart politics. At least I used to say that, right? But then you look at it another way. He's up there talking about states' rights and the Shelby County, which is where the 3 civil rights workers were buried, though everyone in the Shelby County will go to great pains to point out they were not from the Shelby County, the people who murdered them, which I find, sort of a nuance. They actually were from Lauderdale County next door, But you could walk, it wouldn't take you all day to walk to where they buried them from the podium at the Shelby County Fair and to talk about states' rights, which was a code word for segregation. That if you don't talk about that and you're a presidential candidate, you do it. You really have an obligation to. You have to acknowledge that. You have to talk about it. Otherwise, you are playing to that race. That is playing the race card. And I think there's a very ugly history of this. People forget William Buckley, now the sainted, everybody, if only we still had William Buckley around. I mean, William Buckley started out as a Cold Stone racist, arguing for segregation. Now, he recanted, I think genuinely so, but those were the roots of modern American conservatism. And the party never developed. If nothing else, American conservatism is a failed intellectual exercise. And now it's to a point, you can't really articulate with any credibility what American conservatism is.
I think a really clear indicator of this is how conservatives sort of split over Trump, don't you? I mean, you've got this kind of never Trump component that has been sort of forced into a position, although there are some exceptions. Again, Ross Douthat that doesn't fit in here. I don't know how much of a never Trumper he actually is, but I guess we'll find out. But that aside, you've got these never Trumpers like Bill Kristol and that whole world. That essentially have understood that really breaking with the Republican Party essentially requires saying that Democrats are the only normal party at this point, right? And that Democrats are the only party that actually functions, to put it bluntly, as public servants, right?
No, I don't think the Republican Party is in the tradition. I don't think you can really call the Republican Party a American political party in any sense that we've known political parties. The Republican Party has become an extremist movement, and it functions like an extremist movement. And this isn't going to change until it's defeated and defeated and defeated.
On all this stuff, you know how GOP operatives think. What are Trump's campaign managers, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, really thinking about Trump raging about Gershkovich? What are they really thinking about Trump's attacks on Kamala's blackness?
They're panicked by it. And they're realizing that you can't control Donald Trump. And the candidate that they were trying to create is the candidate, if you look at the text of the written acceptance speech, that was written because they knew that's who this person needed to be to have the best chance to win. And then you compare it to what the speech Trump gave.
Right.
I mean, I'd like to write a dissertation about that, because that in essence is what is the truth of the Republican Party. The Republican Party went to war with the modern world and is losing. They get in a fight with Nike over Colin Kaepernick. What happens? Nike makes $9 billion. They get in a fight with Disney. I mean, the happiest company. At one point they were in a fight with NASCAR because they were banning the Confederate flag. You're in a culture war with NASCAR.
Yeah.
And so they are panicked. They built a campaign that was based upon the assumption they were running against a candidate who had disqualified himself through age or performance. and that gave them freedom to do what they really wanted to do. J.D. Vance was that pick. In many ways, it's a very unconfident pick because it's a base pick. Now, I think Biden would have won. I think Biden would have won comfortably. I think Harris is going to win. I don't think it's going to be close. I think this race is going to be like at 1980. It'll be maybe October 20th. Then it's just going to fall apart for Trump. There's always been a reality in this race. Trump lost by 7 million. He needs new customers. For the life of me, I haven't seen anything that guy is doing to get new customers. And they seem to be running customers out of the store at gunpoint at this point.
Well, I'll tell you, Stuart, I hope you're right about that. I don't feel nearly as confident as you, but I do think things are trending in the right direction. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for asking me, Greg. I'm a great admirer of what your work and what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Stuart. Folks, a quick announcement. We're taking next week off. The pod will be down, unfortunately. We just need a break, and I'm sure you guys need a break as well, given all that's going on. But we will be back on Monday, August 12th at full speed ahead, 5 days a week from then on out, all the way through the election. We hope you rejoin us then on Monday, August 12th. We'll see you then. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.